On a diplomatic mission to the Zelthari homeworld, Lieutenant Jake Carter never expected to end up in this mess. One moment, he was stepping out of the decontamination chamber after an atmospheric scan, and the next, he was face to face with Princess Vela, completely unclothed, her violet skin darkened in horror, silver eyes widening. The guards outside her chambers burst in, weapons drawn. You have seen me, human," Vela gasped, grabbing the nearest silk cloth to wrap around herself. Jake blinked. Yeah? Look, this is a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," she hissed. "In Zelthari culture, if one sees a royal unclothed, they must marry them or face execution." Jake stared at the assembled guards, their plasma rifles humming with deadly energy. His pulse pounded. "Okay, let's, talk about this." Vela grabbed his wrist and turned to the guards. "We are to be wed. Take us to the High Council." Jake exhaled sharply. "Well, guess I'm getting married." As the guards escorted them out, he leaned in and muttered, "At least tell me you like humans." Vela's lips twitched. "I suppose I'll have to learn." Jake barely had time to process what just happened before he was being dragged to the grand halls of the Zelthari Palace. Ornate golden walls shimmered under the bioluminescent chandeliers, but all he could focus on was the increasing number of Zelthari staring at him in shock. Some whispered, others glared. "Is it just me," he muttered to Vela, "or do they really not like me?" "They think you've dishonored me," she whispered back. "A human of all beings. Seeing a princess in such a state? It is scandalous." "Not like I wanted to," Jake muttered. She shot him a glare. "Regardless, the High Council must approve our union." The towering palace doors swung open, revealing a vast chamber filled with regal-looking Zelthari seated in a semicircle. At the center sat the High Chancellor, his piercing gaze locked onto Jake. "This human," the Chancellor spat, "claims marriage to our princess?" Vela stepped forward, her voice strong. "By our laws, it must be so." The Chancellor's expression darkened. Then he must prove himself worthy. A trial will decide his fate. Jake swallowed hard. "Trial?" Vela sighed. "Yes. And if you fail, we both die." Jake clenched his fists. "Of course there's a trial. Why wouldn't there be?" Vela gave him a tight-lipped look. "Complaining will not help." The High Chancellor stood. "Human, you will face 3 trials of strength, wisdom, and honor. Only then shall we determine if you are worthy of our princess." Jake exhaled. "Okay, sure. What's the first trial?" The Chancellor gestured, and a side door rumbled open. A massive Zelthari warrior stepped forward, his deep blue skin rippling with muscle. He wielded a staff twice Jake's size, barbed at both ends. "Trial of strength," Vela murmured. Jake stared. "You really should have warned me." The warrior smirked. "Do you accept human?" Jake flexed his fingers. He wasn't the strongest guy, but he'd been through military combat training. Maybe he could use speed instead of brute force. "Guess I don't have a choice." He stepped into the ring. The warrior lunged without warning, swinging the staff in a blur. Jake barely dodged, feeling the rush of air as it whizzed past his head. Vela winced. "Try not to die," she whispered. Jake gritted his teeth. Easier said than done. Jake ducked under another brutal swing, barely keeping his head attached. The warrior fought like a storm, relentless, precise, and terrifyingly strong. Every attack came faster than the last, forcing Jake to stay on the defensive. Think Carter. Think he couldn't overpower this guy. But maybe he didn't have to. The warrior lunged again, thrusting the barbed end of his staff toward Jake's chest. Instead of dodging, Jake sidestepped at the last second and grabbed the shaft, using the warrior's momentum against him. With a grunt, he twisted and yanked. The warrior stumbled forward, momentarily off balance. Jake didn't hesitate. He drove his elbow into the Zelthari's ribs, then kicked the back of his knee. The giant dropped, snarling, but Jake wasn't done. He planted a boot on the staff and wrenched it free. Silence filled the chamber. Vela's eyes widened. The High Chancellor leaned forward. The warrior, still on his knees, stared at Jake, then thumped his fist against his chest. You fight with strategy, not just strength. A true warrior. The Chancellor nodded slowly. The human passes the first trial. Jake exhaled, hands shaking. Asterisk 1 down. 2 to go, asterisk. Jake barely had a moment to breathe before the Chancellor spoke again. The second trial begins now. The trial of wisdom. A pair of robed Zelthari scholars approached, carrying a glowing cube covered in shifting alien symbols. They placed it before Jake. This is an ancient puzzle, the Chancellor explained. It is said that only those with keen intellect can decipher its secret. You must solve it or fail. Jake wiped sweat from his brow. No pressure, huh? Vela leaned in. Focus. It responds to logic, not brute force. Jake studied the cube, watching the symbols rearrange themselves in patterns. It wasn't just random. There was a sequence. He tentatively pressed one sigil, then another. The cube shifted, humming softly. He grinned. It's a pattern recognition test. Piece by piece, he worked through the logic until the cube flared with light. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. Impressive. The human passes. Jake let out a shaky breath. 2 trials down, 1 to go. But something about the High Chancellor's expression made his stomach twist. The final trial, the Chancellor announced, is the trial of honor. His gaze hardened. You must prove your loyalty by making a sacrifice. 2 guards dragged in a trembling Zelthari servant. The poor man looked terrified. This man, the Chancellor continued, is a known traitor. Execute him and prove your commitment to our people. Jake's stomach dropped. You're kidding, right? Vela tensed beside him. This is wrong. The Chancellor ignored her. If you refuse, you will fail. Jake's hands curled into fists. He had fought in wars, taken lives, but this, killing a defenseless man to prove his honor. He met the Chancellor's gaze. No. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The Chancellor's eyes gleamed. Then let us see if honor can save you from death. The guards raised their weapons. Jake's muscles tensed, ready to fight, but Vela suddenly stepped forward. This trial is a farce, she declared, her voice echoing through the chamber. Honor is not proven through blind obedience, but through righteousness. He has passed. The Chancellor's expression darkened. You defy tradition, princess. Vela lifted her chin. If tradition demands senseless bloodshed, then yes. She turned to the watching nobles. Will we have a leader who kills without thought, or one who stands for justice? Murmurs filled the hall. Some looked outraged, but others thoughtful. The Chancellor's fingers tightened around his staff. Very well. He exhaled sharply. The human has passed. Jake barely hid his relief. Vela turned to him, whispering, I hope you realize what you just did. Jake smirked. Yeah, I just got myself a royal wedding. Vela sighed. You are impossible. The chamber erupted into chaos. Some nobles shouted in outrage. Others whispered among themselves. The High Chancellor's face remained stone cold, but Jake could see the tension in his rigid posture. Vela turned to him, lowering her voice. You may have won, but do not mistake this for safety. There are those who will never accept you. Jake sighed. Yeah, I figured. When do we get to the happily ever after part? Before she could answer, a new voice cut through the noise. This wedding is an insult to our people. A tall, armored Zelthari warrior stepped forward, his golden insignia marking him as a general. His gaze burned into Jake with fury. A human marrying our princess? This weak outsider cannot lead. Vela's hands clenched into fists. General Zorth, you overstep. I challenge him. Zortha's voice was deadly calm. By ancient law, I invoke the right of combat. Jake blinked. Wait, what? Vela cursed under her breath. He's challenging you for the right to marry me. Jake exhaled, shaking his head. Of course he is. The Chancellor's lips curled into a smirk. Then let it be so. A final battle. The human's fate will be decided by blood. The crowd roared in approval as the challenge was accepted. Jake rubbed his temples. Why is everything settled with fighting here? Vela grabbed his arm, her silver eyes sharp with worry. Zorith is one of our finest warriors. He will not hold back. Jake sighed. Didn't expect him to. He glanced at the general, who stood rigid and confident, already certain of his victory. The Chancellor raised a hand. At dawn, the combat will commence. The winner shall claim the princess's hand. Jake muttered, no pressure. Vela hesitated, then spoke low. You don't have to do this. He smirked. I think I do. Unless you want to marry this guy. Her expression hardened. Not in 1,000 lifetimes. Jake cracked his knuckles. Then I better win. Vela's fingers tightened around his. Then fight like your life depends on it. Jake exhaled. Because it does. The sun rose over the palace arena, casting long shadows across the stone battlefield. Zelthari nobles gathered in the stands, eager to witness the duel. Jake stood in the center, rolling his shoulders, while General Zorth approached in gleaming armor, gripping a wickedly curved blade. Vela stood at the edge, eyes locked on Jake. Remember, you don't have to overpower him. Just outthink him. Jake smirked. That's the plan. The High Chancellor raised his hand. Begin. Zorth lunged without hesitation, his blade slicing through the air. Jake barely dodged, feeling the heat of the strike. He scrambled back, scanning for weaknesses. Zorth grinned. You're fast, human, but not fast enough. He attacked again this time. Jake was ready. Instead of dodging, he sidestepped and kicked Zorth's knee. The general staggered, surprised. Jake grinned. I just need to keep him guessing. The fight had only begun. Zorth roared in frustration. Swinging his blade in a deadly arc, Jake ducked, feeling the wind of the strike as it barely missed his head. He couldn't win in a straight fight, but he didn't need to. Jake dodged another strike, forcing Zorth to overextend. At the last second, Jake lunged forward, slamming his elbow into the general's ribs. The warrior stumbled, eyes flashing with rage. You fight like a coward. Zorth spat. Jake smirked. Nah, I fight to win. Zorth charged again, but Jake was ready. Instead of dodging, he pivoted, grabbing Zorth's wrist and using his own momentum to flip him onto the ground. Before the warrior could react, Jake pressed a knee against his chest and wrenched the blade from his grip. Silence filled the arena. Jake tossed the blade aside. Yield. Zorth snarled, then, slowly, thumped a fist to his chest. You have earned your place. The High Chancellor rose. The human has won. Vela stepped forward, her expression unreadable. Then she smirked. I suppose I must marry you now. Jake grinned. Guess you're stuck with me. The crowd erupted into cheers. Against all odds, the human had claimed victory and a princess.